This is the story of the making of an exhibition. 4 little ceramic objects started it: a camel, a cat, a pot, and a dish, each serving a function, attracting the eye and telling the tale. Donated to the Chazen Museum of Art at the University of Wisconsin-Madison by a generous alumnus, these objects quickly prompted an opportunity for an art history class to reinvigorate and reinstall a display case in the museum. So this exhibition story is not the usual one. More often, it is a long-range plan, a well-honed idea, a time-tested method. On this one, we jumped in, start to finish, in an academic semester. None of the students were experts on 18th century ceramics, only one had ever done any kind of exhibition work. But they read, brainstormed, and used the tools of material culture analysis. I am Ann Smart Martin, the professor who led this enterprise. I teach material culture method and theory, and I have written and studied about 18th century ceramics for many years. I have to admit that I really like this stuff. Okay, I am crazy about it. As important, we had a terrific museum staff. Cassie Wilkins as curator, Steve Johanowitz as preparator, and a supportive director, Russell Panchenko. And the students achieved the amazing, a smart and beautiful exhibition, website, and podcast. Come with me down to the basement, to the storage area, and you can see just the array of different choices we had. You can see sauce boats, you can see tureens, teapots, and various other sort of sugars and creamers. All these are the fancy dining wares and tea wares that people enjoyed. Think about it. Think about how would we choose? How would we work through this vast array? And you can see at first maybe it looks like just stacks upon stacks of dishes. Well, I think that the class really felt this too at the very beginning, but after they researched and learned and were able to identify and come up with the absolute best object to really fit within this matrix of ideas we're working on. What you see is the old exhibition case. Some years old, maybe a little more old-fashioned. It's something at the Chazen called a niche case, which is really a space between the larger exhibition galleries. So the viewer is up a little closer and can be drawn in. What do you think? What do you see? Well, I see a lot of shiny and gilded things, porcelain, beautiful aesthetic work. The class, we looked at this and thought about what we wanted to do and maybe how we wanted to do things differently. We thought it was a little formal, it was a little crowded, repetition, just sort of cups and saucers marching along a little bit. There were not that many, well, there's a points of interest, but there weren't that many sort of points of interest to draw you in or levels going up and down. The background fabric looked a little dull, so we'll talk about that. But also the lighting was very muted, no spotlights. So it didn't really give the viewer something to draw them in to really get these objects to have a spark.
When you go in to get a coffee cup, it's not a matched set, it's mixed coffee cups, right? How many of you blindly reach in there and just grab whatever's there? Or how many of you actually think, you know, I'll take that one?
I think that one. I have a set. I have a set.
I always want the pretty.
I mean, maybe I'm OCD or something, but I mean, there's a specific one I'm going to want. And it's going to be part of the set.
Yeah. You know, that you're experiencing very much the same thing that consumers back then experienced. And you know, it's kind of, I noticed this the other day because I reach in and it might be for aesthetic reasons. I might think it's the coolest looking. It might be the one that holds heat the best, or might have a shape that I'm interested in. But we make those decisions every day.
Even more white than that one, so they figured out more and more how to mill the clay better and better. But it's still, the appeal was that you could get it really thin. So that mug John Blake had thrown on a wheel, but the 2 teapots going around were slip cast, which you may remember me describing. They made a pattern. They would carve out of wood with all of these pictures on them, and these 2 teapots in particular were taken from a print source. So a popular print that was celebrating the victory at Portobello. And so the pattern was carved out of wood, and then the mold was made out of plaster. And then what you do is take stoneware slip, so kind of liquidy clay, and pour it into your mold all the way up to the top, and let it sit for a little while, because the mold was made of plaster, so it would suck the moisture out of the slip and leave this kind of film of less watery clay around the outside. And you had to, you left it there long enough that you got a wall that was going to be sturdy, but you didn't want to leave it there too long, because what you wanted was a very thin wall. And when the time was just right, then you'd tip your mold over and pour out all the extra slip, and you'd be left with a thin wall that had been sucked out in the mold, which is how they were able to get such sharp lines and such sharp relief patterns on these pieces. So that was a great new innovation, which, as you know, was made in all different kinds of shapes, because it's the same thing that you guys have with the camel shape. I think you might have a few other slip cast ones.
Then they dip it in brown slip, so the whole thing was totally brown. Then they put it on a turning jig, a machine,
An engine
engine
turned.
and which would then have had a cutting tool, and it would go clink, cut, clink, cut, right like that, and they cut through the brown back down to the agate that was underneath. And that's how you get these multiple layers.
Well, part of the process was, as Cassie and I and the students were working through this, it's very hard to imagine, are there too many dark pieces? That was a big, strong conversation. Is that overwhelmed to have these, and it ended up with 4, but that at one point was too dramatic, because it detracted from all this pastel. But then as you designed it, it made perfect sense. As a matter of fact, you added a teapot back in because it made perfect sense to have this.
Yeah, it was actually, you add, if you only had 1 or maybe 2, then they're oddballs. But when you have 4, and it was actually Russell's kind of suggestion was, because he saw a kind of a variety of different groupings, he said, all right, we'll take it and then draw distinct lines between the two. And so I kind of did that, and then, but at the same time, weaved them in where this made sense to this, made sense to this.
I'm here to give you the student perspective. Most of me, like most of the other students, came into the class knowing a little bit about material culture and not much about putting together an exhibition. At the beginning, it was a little scary for everyone coming together and figuring out how we're going to do this, but as the class got to know each other and had a lot of long brainstorming sessions, we came up with a plan on how to execute the given tasks. As the semester went on, we decided that we would come up with 4 themes to represent the 4 donated objects. The 4 themes being exoticism, naturalism, technology, and social practices. With these 4 themes, they encompassed almost everything in the case that we chose from the Chazen basement. So each piece can say a little bit about the technology in the 18th century ceramics, or the love of exoticism, or the naturalism. Once we had the 4 themes set, we had to learn how to write the IDs, labels, and catalog entries, which proved to be much more difficult than we anticipated. The IDs, we had to learn how to keep short, concise sentences that would sum up what we are trying to get across, and then also extensive catalog entries with much research and background information. Now looking at this niche case, the final product, I see all the hard work and many creative minds that went into it. And I can say now that I will never look at another exhibition in the same way again.
And it's about finding compromises. I hate to say it, I think a museum exhibit is much more about making compromises between what you would like and what you need to show the audience. So I learned that in some ways in a hard way.
I thought it was kind of hard to conform our ideas to like museums, like I guess what they would allow us to do. I know we had a lot of really great ideas and they just would flow with the museum.
Yeah.
I learned about ceramics, as strange as that sounds, because this is not my area of concentration. British ceramics. I actually found favor in looking at creamware, the terrain being my personal favorite considering it was my object, and actually relating it to my field of study, looking at functionality. I now find myself wondering that more so when it comes to African art and the different purposes and reasons of.
It made me much more appreciative of how much goes into an exhibition. You know, all the stages of production and how collaborative the process is.
I had no clue, and I'm still bothered by how it's done. With the engine turning lathe, that article, I think I read about 15 times just to get the basis of it. And I really.
And why was that? Why do you think it was? What was it about the technology that you found befuddling, or what was the word?
I think it really was the fact that I had never. I'm not an artist myself, so I don't really understand the act of throwing pottery and how that whole thing works. I think it's a very interesting process. I have absolutely no idea how to do it.
Kenan, tell us how you feel.
I learned a lot from the writing process. In school I'm so used to doing research or analysis papers, so it was a good challenge to write some short text to draw the audience in, and writing for the website.
So that wish to be a little more whimsical or fun, what was the preventing factor?
Well, I know when we were first brainstorming about titles for the exhibition, we were kind of told that it would not be taken seriously if we didn't have a very serious and directed title. And I think that depends on who's viewing it. And I think especially in a setting like in Madison, where it's a college town and there's a lot of college kids looking at it, like through the museum, that it might be beneficial to add a little spunk.
Why did we want to do this film, or this idea of documenting this exhibition process? I think, first of all, it was important because I wanted to show how complicated it all really is. I mean, it takes a huge amount of work to get to something so simple as just 20-some objects put in a case. We had to start with the ones that were the gift to the museum and sort of build an exhibition around them. Another 20 or so odd more pieces to tell a story and to come up with a story to tell with that group. So we were able to use the collection at the Chazen and go through and select probably twice as many as what we finally have. We researched, we documented, we wrote labels. Admittedly, we probably should have left a lot more time for label writing because it takes a lot to get those things nailed down to something a little to the point, terse, but also easily to be understood. It's not academic writing, it's something very pithy. Then we also have been writing other kinds of materials for a website, so we can have a virtual exhibition as well. So, but by showing, I think, all these steps in the process and the way we interact with other people, other museum staff, with the curator, with the preparator, the person who actually puts the exhibition up, we really got to see, I think, the way in which such a thing evolves. On the other hand, I think it was also important to let other students see that this is another way of learning, that it's not just, if you want to study, say, the ceramics of the 18th century, it's not just me standing up in front of a picture on a screen and talking about it, but it can also be about handling them and seeing how they feel, how they look closely at the decoration, and think clearly what kind of essential stories do they hold and what new can we say about life in the past?